You know that exact moment when you realize your husband thinks you're about as sharp as a bowling ball? Well, I discovered that Blake apparently confused me with furniture, specifically the kind that doesn't have eyes or ears. My name is Zoe, I'm 32, and until 3 weeks ago, I thought I was living in a reasonably functional marriage. Turns out I was actually starring in my own personal soap opera, except nobody bothered to give me the script. It was a Wednesday afternoon when my perfectly organized world decided to cosplay as a demolition site. I was looking for my phone charger in Blake's car. You know, that innocent little search that has destroyed more marriages than a reality TV show. When I found something that made my stomach drop faster than my faith in humanity. A receipt. Not just any receipt, mind you. A receipt from Victoria's Secret for $180 worth of lingerie. Now, before you think, oh, how sweet, he's planning something romantic, let me paint you the full picture. The lingerie was size XS. I'm a solid size M and proud of it. Unless Blake was planning to shrink me in the wash, this little shopping spree wasn't for me. But wait, it gets better. The receipt had a name written on it, for my gorgeous Tiffany. And there, in Blake's handwriting that I know better than my own coffee order, was a little heart. A heart. This man who forgets to write "love you" on my birthday cards suddenly became Shakespeare for his side piece. I sat in that car for a full 10 minutes, staring at this piece of paper like it might suddenly transform into a grocery list or something equally innocent. But no, it just sat there being exactly what it was. Evidence that my husband of 6 years was cheating on me with someone named Tiffany, who apparently shops in the juniors section. Now, here's where most wives would either confront their husband immediately or have a dramatic breakdown in the driveway. But see, I work in event planning, which means I have two very important skills: keeping my composure under pressure and planning elaborate schemes that would make a military strategist weep with envy. So instead of screaming, crying, or throwing his golf clubs into the neighbor's pool, I decided to do something much more productive. I became a detective. Nancy Drew wishes she had my motivation. The first thing I did was check our joint credit card statements. Oh boy, what a treasure hunt that turned out to be. Apparently, Blake had been living a double life for months. Fancy dinners at restaurants I'd never heard of, hotel rooms booked on days he claimed to be working late, and, my personal favorite, a weekend spa trip that he told me was a boring work conference in Cleveland. Cleveland. My foot. The man went to Napa Valley with Miss Size XS while I was home organizing our spice cabinet and feeling guilty about eating ice cream for dinner. But the real kicker came when I decided to do a little social media stalking. And yes, before you judge me, desperate times call for desperate measures. And I was feeling pretty desperate. Tiffany Morrison, that's her full name. 26 years old, works as a dental hygienist, and apparently has an Instagram account dedicated to her fitness journey and living my best life. Every single photo looks like it was shot by a professional photographer, which either means she's incredibly talented with a selfie stick or someone's been helping her with those artistic shots. Want to guess who that someone might be? I scrolled through months of her posts, and it was like watching a highlight reel of my husband's disappearances. That hiking trip he took with his college buddy? There's Tiffany at the same trail, same weekend, wearing what suspiciously looks like Blake's favorite hiking jacket. The work dinner that ran late last month? Tiffany posted a photo of a fancy steak dinner with the caption, "Best date night ever," at the exact same restaurant our credit card was charged for. The woman was basically live tweeting her affair with my husband, and I'd been too trusting to notice. But here's what really got under my skin. It wasn't just the cheating. It was the sheer stupidity of it all. Blake thought he was being clever, sneaky, masterminding some great deception. Meanwhile, his girlfriend was posting evidence on social media like she was documenting a science experiment. These two weren't criminal masterminds. They were barely criminal amateurs. And that's when I realized something important. If you're going to play games with someone, you better make sure they don't have access to professional-grade audio-visual equipment and 6 years of pent-up frustration. Because Blake was about to learn that while he'd been playing checkers, I'd been unknowingly training for chess. And Tiffany? Well, She was about to discover that being the other woman is a lot less glamorous when the wife has a master's degree in making people's lives complicated. The beautiful thing about being in event planning is that you learn to think 3 steps ahead of everyone else. While Blake was figuring out how to sneak around, I was already planning his downfall. And unlike his pathetic attempt at deception, my plan was going to be flawless. I gave myself exactly 1 week to put everything together. 1 week to gather evidence, set up the perfect scenario, and arrange what I like to call the confrontation. Because if Blake wanted to treat our marriage like a joke, I was going to make sure the punchline was on him. The game was on, and Blake had no idea he'd just challenged the wrong player. Over the next week, I transformed from loving wife into surveillance expert faster than Blake could say, "Working late again, honey." And let me tell you, once you start really paying attention to someone's behavior, the lies become so obvious they might as well be wearing neon signs. Take Monday, for example. Blake came home at 7:30 p.m., claiming he had to finish up some quarterly reports. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair looked like he'd been running his hands through it, and, here's the kicker, he smelled like vanilla perfume. Now, unless the quarterly reports were written by a Victoria's Secret model, I'm pretty sure I knew where he'd actually been. When I asked how his day was, he launched into this elaborate story about spreadsheets and client meetings. The man gave me more details about his fake workday than he'd shared about his actual job in months. It was almost impressive, really. Blake had found his true calling. He should have been writing fiction novels instead of whatever it is he actually does for a living. But the real comedy gold came on Wednesday when I decided to test his lying skills. I told him I was planning to surprise him at work with lunch. You should have seen his face. The man looked like I'd just announced I was planning to burn down his office building. "Oh, you don't need to do that," he said, practically sweating through his shirt. "I'm going to be in meetings all day. Back-to-back meetings. Very important ones. You know how it is." Right. Because nothing says important business meeting like the motel receipt I found in his pants pocket later that evening. The beautiful thing about living with someone for 6 years is that you know all their tells. Blake touches his nose when he's lying. Always has. He also starts talking too fast and gives way too many unnecessary details. Wednesday night, he told me a 15-minute story about his lunch meeting with the Henderson account that included descriptions of what everyone ordered, how long they waited for a table, and the exact temperature of his coffee. I almost applauded. The man had created an entire alternate universe where he was the hardest working employee in corporate America. Meanwhile, I was doing some actual detective work. I'd installed a tracking app on our shared iPad, the one Blake never uses but always leaves connected to his phone. Suddenly, I had a front-row seat to his daily adventure tours around town. Monday, the motel on 5th Street. Tuesday, Tiffany's apartment complex. Wednesday, a fancy Italian restaurant downtown. Thursday, back to the motel. Friday, Tiffany's place again. The man had a more exciting social calendar as a cheater than we'd had as a married couple in the past year. But the absolute best part was watching him try to cover his tracks at home. Blake, who normally couldn't remember to take out the trash without a written reminder, suddenly developed the organizational skills of a Pentagon operative. He started carrying his phone everywhere, even to the bathroom. He changed his passcode. He began doing his own laundry for the first time in our entire relationship. When I asked why he was suddenly so interested in household chores, he told me he was trying to be more helpful around the house. Sweet, right? Except the only clothes he was washing were the ones that came home smelling like vanilla perfume and guilty conscience. The irony wasn't lost on me that my husband was putting more effort into hiding his affair than he'd put into our marriage in months. When was the last time Blake had planned a surprise for me? When had he last brought me flowers, taken me somewhere nice, or even remembered what perfume I wear? But apparently, Tiffany was getting the full royal treatment. Fresh flowers delivered to her apartment twice a week. I know because I may have accidentally driven by her place a few times during my lunch breaks. Expensive dinners, weekend getaways, thoughtful little gifts that showed up on her Instagram with captions like, "Someone spoils me too much." Yeah, someone spoils her too much with my husband's time and our joint credit card. The more I watched this pathetic display, the angrier I got. Not just at Blake, but at the sheer audacity of it all. This man was treating me like I was invisible while playing Prince Charming to a woman who posts selfies with captions like, "Just being me," and thinks that deep thoughts come with sunset filters. I started documenting everything. Screenshots of his location data, photos of receipts, credit card statements, even a few pictures I took when I followed him to one of their little rendezvous spots. Not because I'm a stalker, but because I learned a long time ago that when you're dealing with liars, evidence is everything. And Blake? Blake was lying about everything. The overtime he'd been claiming? His company's HR department confirmed he'd been leaving early most days for the past 3 months. The business trips? I checked his work calendar. Nothing scheduled. The weekend he spent helping his brother move? His brother posted photos from his family vacation in Florida that same weekend. Every single story was fabricated. Blake had constructed an entire alternate reality where he was simultaneously the most dedicated employee and the most helpful family member in America, all while actually spending his time playing house with a woman who thinks inspirational quotes count as personality traits. The funny thing is, I think Blake actually started believing his own lies. He'd come home and tell these elaborate stories with such conviction that I almost wondered if he'd forgotten what actually happened. Maybe that's what cheaters do. They live in their fantasy world so long that reality becomes negotiable. But reality was about to come knocking, and it was bringing friends. Because while Blake was busy being a part-time husband and full-time liar, I was planning something that would make his little deception look like amateur hour. He wanted to play games? Fine. But he was about to learn that when you challenge someone who organizes events for a living, you better be prepared for a show you'll never forget. The stage was set, the players were in position, and Blake had no idea that his final performance was about to begin. By Thursday of week 2, I had enough evidence to start my own private investigation business. Blake's affair wasn't just confirmed, it was documented, cataloged, and organized with the kind of precision that would make a librarian weep with joy. But evidence was only half the battle. The other half was figuring out exactly how to use it. See, I could have gone the traditional route, confronted him at home, thrown his clothes on the lawn, screamed about trust and betrayal like every wronged wife in every movie ever made. But where's the artistry in that? Where's the poetic justice? Blake had been treating me like I was stupid for months. He'd been lying to my face, stealing from our joint accounts, and apparently telling Tiffany that I was emotionally distant and didn't understand him anymore. I know this because the man forgot to log out of his email on our shared computer, and Tiffany is surprisingly chatty in her responses. According to their romantic correspondence, I'm apparently a workaholic who doesn't appreciate Blake's needs and ambitions. Funny, because I seem to remember being the one who supported him through 3 job changes, covered our mortgage when he decided to find himself for 6 months, and listened to him complain about his boss, his coworkers, and his family for 6 straight years. But sure, Blake, I'm the problem. The beautiful thing about being underestimated is that nobody sees you coming. Blake thought I was too trusting, too naive, too focused on my own career to notice his little side adventure. He'd gotten comfortable, careless. He started leaving evidence around like breadcrumbs, probably subconsciously wanting to get caught so he wouldn't have to be the one to end things. Well, congratulations, Blake. You're about to get exactly what you wished for. I decided that if Blake wanted to play the role of deceived husband escaping his terrible marriage, then I'd give him an audience worthy of his performance. And Tiffany, who'd been posting about her mysterious boyfriend and how she was finally being treated like a queen, deserved to learn exactly what kind of king she'd chosen. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Blake had mentioned, in one of his rare moments of honesty, that his company was having their quarterly team meeting next Friday afternoon in the parking lot, some kind of outdoor team-building exercise that his boss, Mr. Harrison, was apparently very excited about. Perfect. A captive audience of Blake's co-workers, his boss, and anyone else who happened to be in the area. Now, here's where my professional skills came in handy. As an event planner, I have access to portable sound systems, wireless microphones, and projection equipment that most people only see at concerts or conferences. I also have relationships with rental companies, catering services, and a very understanding assistant named Marcus, who asks very few questions when I request unusual equipment combinations. So you need a wireless sound system, a portable projector, and a catering setup for— "What kind of event exactly?" Marcus asked when I called in my order. "Let's call it a surprise documentary screening," I said. "Very exclusive guest list. Very personal content." Marcus has worked with me long enough to know that when I get that particular tone in my voice, it's better to just process the order and not ask follow-up questions. The beauty of the plan was its timing. Blake had been telling me for weeks that Friday was going to be a long day at the office, with mandatory overtime. Meanwhile, his location data showed he'd been meeting Tiffany every Friday at 3 p.m. at the coffee shop 2 blocks from his workplace. According to their text messages, yes, I'd figured out his new passcode by watching him enter it. Apparently, it's Tiffany's birthday. They were planning something special for this Friday. Blake had booked a room at the fancy hotel downtown, the one with the rooftop bar and the view of the city. He'd told Tiffany it was going to be their celebration dinner for her promotion at work. How sweet. My husband was celebrating another woman's career advancement while I covered his share of our household expenses. But Blake had made one crucial mistake in his planning. His company's team meeting was scheduled for 2:30 p.m., which meant he'd have to choose between showing up for work or meeting Tiffany at their usual time. Want to guess which one he chose? Thursday evening, Blake came home with another elaborate story about Friday's mandatory training session and how he'd probably be unreachable for most of the afternoon. He was practically vibrating with excitement, probably thinking about his romantic hotel reservation and whatever lies he was planning to tell Tiffany about his future with her. "That's fine, honey," I told him, using my sweetest voice. "I'll probably be working late myself. Big event this weekend. You know how it is." Blake nodded sympathetically, playing the role of supportive husband right up until the end. "You work so hard, Zoe. I hope someday you can find better work-life balance." The irony was so thick I could have served it at a dinner party. That night, I made my final preparations. I arranged for Marcus to set up the equipment at Blake's office building by 2 p.m. I confirmed the catering order. Nothing fancy, just coffee and pastries for Blake's coworkers, because I wanted them comfortable and alert for the show. I charged all my devices, organized my evidence files, and practiced my presentation, because that's what this was going to be, a presentation, a carefully orchestrated reveal that would expose not just Blake's affair, but his lies, his financial deception, and his complete lack of respect for everyone in his life. I even picked out a nice outfit. If you're going to destroy someone's reputation, you might as well look professional doing it. Friday morning, Blake kissed me goodbye like he did every day, told me he loved me, and reminded me that he'd be stuck in meetings all afternoon. "Have a great day at work, sweetheart," I said, smiling like the loving wife I'd been for 6 years. It was the last time Blake would ever lie to me, because in about 4 hours, his entire world was going to explode, and everyone he'd been deceiving was going to have front row seats to the show. Friday afternoon arrived with the kind of perfect weather that makes you believe the universe has a sense of dramatic timing: clear skies, gentle breeze, ideal conditions for an outdoor team meeting, and an even better conditions for public humiliation. I arrived at Blake's office building at exactly 2:15 p.m., 15 minutes before his company's team meeting was scheduled to begin. Marcus had already set up the equipment with military precision: portable speakers positioned strategically around the parking lot, a wireless microphone system tested and ready, and a projection screen that could be seen from anywhere in the area. "Everything's good to go, boss," Marcus said, handing me the remote controls. "Sound systems connected to your phone, projectors ready for your presentation, and I've got the catering set up over by the main entrance." "Perfect," I said, watching Blake's co-workers start filtering into the parking lot. "And you remember what to do at 2:35? Marcus grinned. "Cafe Luna, table near the window, order a large coffee, and keep my phone connected to yours on speaker mode. I'll position myself close enough to pick up their conversation clearly. You're a lifesaver, Marcus. This is either going to be brilliant, or we're both going to end up unemployed." "Worth the risk," he said, checking his watch. "I better head over there now. Blake should be arriving any minute." I positioned myself near the back of the gathering crowd, close enough to see everything but far enough away to make my escape if necessary. Blake's boss was setting up his own presentation materials, completely unaware that his afternoon was about to take a very unexpected turn. At 2:25 p.m., I spotted Blake's car pulling into the parking lot across the street. Not his company's lot, but the public parking area next to the coffee shop where he always met Tiffany. Perfect timing. I activated the wireless microphone system and checked the projection screen one more time. Everything was ready. At exactly 2:30 p.m., Mr. Harrison called the meeting to order. "Thank you all for being here today," he announced to the crowd of about 30 employees. "I know it's unusual to hold our quarterly meeting outdoors, but I thought a change of scenery might be good for team morale." That's when I stepped forward and activated my microphone. "I hope you don't mind if I add a presentation to today's agenda," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the parking lot through the wireless sound system. The crowd turned toward me, confused but curious. Mr. Harrison looked puzzled but nodded politely. After all, I looked professional, sounded confident, and clearly had official-looking equipment. "My name is Zoe Chen, and I'm Blake Morrison's wife," I continued, noting how several people's expressions changed to recognition. Blake had obviously mentioned me at work events, probably during his Good Husband performance days. Blake couldn't be here today because he's currently across the street at Cafe Luna, meeting with his girlfriend Tiffany for what he described in their text messages as a celebration of their future together. I clicked the remote, and the projection screen lit up with a slide showing Blake's location data from the past month. A neat map with pins marking every hotel, restaurant, and apartment complex he'd visited during his overtime hours. The parking lot went completely silent. "Now I know what you're thinking," I continued, warming up to my audience. "Maybe there's some misunderstanding. Maybe Blake really is working all those extra hours he's been claiming. So let me show you his actual work schedule, which I obtained through a very polite conversation with your HR department." Click. Next slide. Blake's official work schedule showing he'd been leaving early or calling in sick on every single day he'd claimed to be working overtime. Someone in the crowd whispered, "Oh my gosh." "But wait, there's more," I said, channeling my inner infomercial host. "Blake has also been financing this relationship with funds from our joint accounts. Here's a breakdown of his purchases over the past 3 months. Click. A detailed spreadsheet showing hotel charges, restaurant bills, jewelry purchases, and that $180 Victoria's Secret receipt, all organized by date, with Tiffany's corresponding Instagram posts displayed alongside them. Mr. Harrison was staring at the screen with his mouth open. Several of Blake's co-workers were taking photos with their phones. "The beautiful thing about social media," I continued, "is that it creates such a detailed record of people's lives. For example, here's Tiffany's post from last weekend, when Blake told me he was at a work conference in Chicago." Click. Tiffany's Instagram photo of her and Blake at a spa resort in North Carolina, her arms wrapped around him, both of them wearing matching robes with the caption, "Weekend Getaway with My Love." That's when I heard someone behind me gasp, "Is that actually Blake?" "Oh, yes," I confirmed. But here's my favorite part. Blake has been telling Tiffany that he's planning to divorce me, and that I'm, and I quote from their email exchange, "a workaholic who doesn't understand his emotional needs." Click. Screenshot of Blake's email to Tiffany describing me as distant and career-obsessed, while he was just trying to find happiness. Interesting perspective, I noted, considering that I've been covering his share of our mortgage payments for the past 4 months while he spent our savings on his emotional discovery journey. Click. Bank statements showing the financial reality of our household. My income covering everything, while Blake's contributions mysteriously decreased at exactly the same time his extracurricular expenses increased. The crowd was now completely captivated. Some people looked horrified, others seemed fascinated by the sheer audacity of the presentation. Mr. Harrison looked like he was trying to figure out whether this was the most entertaining or most mortifying thing that had ever happened at a company meeting. "Now, I know Blake can't be here to defend himself," I said, "because he's currently explaining to Tiffany their romantic plans for tonight. Fortunately, I have an associate positioned at Cafe Luna who's going to help us understand exactly what Blake's priorities really are." I held up my phone, showing the active call connection to Marcus. Ladies and gentlemen, Liv from Table 7 at Cafe Luna. Here's what Blake Morrison is telling his girlfriend about his future plans while his co-workers are waiting for him at a mandatory work meeting. Marcus's voice came through clearly on the phone connection. And then, perfectly timed, Blake's voice filled the parking lot through the wireless speakers. Told Zoe I'd be stuck in meetings all afternoon, so we have plenty of time. I can't wait to get out of this job anyway. These people are so boring, and Harrison thinks he's so important with his stupid team meetings. The crowd's reaction was instantaneous. Gasps, murmurs of shock, and what sounded like someone trying not to laugh. Blake's voice continued. Once we're together officially, I won't have to pretend to care about any of this corporate nonsense. You and I can start fresh somewhere new. Tiffany's voice joined in. But what about Zoe? Have you told her yet about us? She'll figure it out eventually. Honestly, Tiff, she's so wrapped up in her own work that she probably won't even notice I'm gone until the bills start piling up. The silence in the parking lot was deafening. Mr. Harrison stepped forward and took my microphone. Well, he said to the crowd, I think we can consider today's team-building exercise a complete success. We've certainly learned a lot about teamwork, trust, and professional integrity. He paused and looked directly at me. Mrs. Morrison, would you be available to discuss Blake's employment status with me after this presentation? I smiled and spoke into my phone. Marcus, you can hang up now. Mission accomplished. I think Blake might be discussing his employment status with you himself very soon, Mr. Harrison. The aftermath was more spectacular than I could have imagined. Blake came running across the street exactly 17 minutes after I'd finished my presentation. Probably because someone at the coffee shop had recorded my little show and posted it on social media faster than you can say viral workplace drama. He arrived to find his entire company's staff still standing in the parking lot, many of them now enjoying the free coffee and pastries I'd provided, discussing the finer points of my evidence collection like they were reviewing a Netflix documentary. Zoe, he shouted, his face red and panicked. What are you doing here? What is all this? Oh, hi, honey, I said sweetly, packing up my presentation materials with the casual efficiency of someone who'd just finished a successful corporate training seminar. How was your meeting with Tiffany? Did you two make any interesting decisions about your future? Blake looked around at his co-workers, all of whom were staring at him with expressions ranging from amusement to disgust. And I watched the exact moment he realized that his carefully constructed double life had just been demolished in front of his professional network. This is crazy, he stammered. You can't do this here, at my workplace. Actually, Mr. Harrison interrupted, stepping forward with a folder in his hands. I think we need to have a conversation, Blake. My office now. Blake tried to protest, tried to explain, tried to salvage something from the wreckage of his deception. But it's hard to argue with time-stamped evidence and audio recordings of yourself describing your coworkers as boring idiots while you're ditching team meetings to meet your girlfriend. The meeting with Mr. Harrison lasted exactly 43 minutes. Blake emerged from the building carrying a cardboard box with his personal belongings and a facial expression that suggested he'd just been introduced to the concept of consequences for the first time in his adult life. Meanwhile, I'd driven home to find Tiffany sitting on my front porch, looking like someone had just explained to her that her mysterious boyfriend came with some very non-mysterious baggage. Are you Zoe? She asked as I got out of my car. Guilty as charged, I replied. Let me guess. Blake's been telling you stories about his terrible wife who doesn't understand him? Tiffany looked down at her hands. He said you guys were separated. He said you were getting divorced and just living together until the paperwork was final. Interesting, I said, unlocking my front door. Because I never agreed to a separation, never filed for divorce, and definitely never agreed to subsidize his dating life with our joint credit cards. I didn't know, she said quietly. I really didn't know he was still… he made it sound like you two were already over. I studied her face for a moment. Tiffany looked genuinely upset, genuinely surprised. Maybe she really hadn't known the full extent of Blake's lies. Maybe she'd been as deceived as I had, just in a different way. Look, I said finally, Blake's been lying to both of us. The difference is you get to walk away from this mess. I get to divorce it." Tiffany nodded and stood up. "I'm sorry," she said. "I really am. I know that doesn't fix anything, but—" "Actually," I interrupted, "it fixes more than you might think. Because now I know that when Blake inevitably tries to make this whole thing my fault, at least one person knows the truth about what he was telling people." 6 months later, I was sitting in my new apartment, smaller than the house I'd shared with Blake, but entirely mine, reading the final divorce decree. Blake had tried to claim he deserved half of everything because he'd been emotionally neglected during our marriage. The judge was not impressed by his argument, especially after my lawyer presented the financial records showing Blake's emotional neglect had cost our joint accounts about $15,000. As for Blake himself, he'd moved in with his brother after losing his job and being unable to afford his own place. Apparently, being publicly exposed as a liar and embezzler doesn't do wonders for your employment prospects. Tiffany, surprisingly, had sent me a text message last month. She'd started dating someone new, someone who, according to her message, actually got divorced before asking me out. The final irony? Blake kept calling me for weeks after everything fell apart, insisting that we could work things out, and that I'd overreacted to what he called a temporary lapse in judgment. A temporary lapse in judgment. 6 months of systematic lying, cheating, and stealing, reduced to a temporary lapse in judgment. I told him he was absolutely right. His judgment had definitely lapsed. Permanently. These days, when people ask me about my marriage, I tell them that Blake taught me something valuable about trust. It's not about believing everything someone tells you. It's about making sure that if they lie to you, they're at least smart enough not to document it on social media. Turns out, I married the wrong kind of storyteller, but I became exactly the right kind of narrator.